Okay, folks, welcome to another turbo educational video. If you do not like these turbo educational videos, as some people have expressed to me, I do not care. The purpose of this channel is for my satisfaction, and your entertainment from these videos is purely incidental. This is to say, I don't care about your complaints. Don't voice your complaints. They will go unheard. Anyways, today's edition, Turbo Educational, answers the question, I think, pretty definitively. When torque values for lugs are specified on an electrical installation, are they required? And to people who would have even the most modest knowledge of the National Electric Code in its various editions, which, by the way, is enforceable in all 50 U.S. states to one degree or another, except maybe Kansas. It should seem as yes. I mean, really, here's my reasoning we're going to use today here. I really only had to pull about 3 excerpts from the code. This is NEC 2023. But certain journeymen who made videos about this, I'm thinking of one in particular, seem to use shoddy reasoning to worm their way out of it being required and it being more of a personal preference. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it's not. It is required. And so we'll go over it today. Okay, so first thing we'll go over, a lot of these excerpts come from NEC section 110, which deals with general requirements across all installations. 110.3b, okay, that's okay right here, okay. Equipment that is listed, labeled, or both, or identified for a use shall be installed and used in accordance with any instructions, including in the listing, labeling, or identification. I failed to mention in the beginning that we're not going to go over definitions. I assume that you have eyes, you can read, you can visit the definition section, section 100 of the code. But it's basically saying that any instructions and decals and various inserts that come with the products are required to be followed because they're included with the listing that you need to operate equipment that is over 50 volts. So, I mean, at a pretty cursory glance, using this example right here, we have a lot of listing information contained on this little baby right here. And probably won't be able to see it too well right here. Okay, is a chart with various wire sizes and materials, and the torque value that the manufacturer set for the threaded lugs that will connect the wires behind this dead front cover here to the breaker. So again, all of this diagram here is included with the listing. It's part of the product instructions. You have torque values on it. In addition, let's see, on the listing label for any given individual circuit breaker is torque values. This is listed for copper and aluminum, 60 to 75 degree Celsius insulation, 14 to 10 gauge AWG, and the specific tightening torque, which in this case is 25 inch-pounds. So there's no ambiguity here that torque values are included with the product instructions, as they are with basically any breaker box that's not from nowhere China. We've figured out pretty well in the past that you make sure that these bolts are tightened properly. But perhaps even more damning than that, and granted, this is the 2023 edition, some of these sections have possibly been clarified over the years to account for certain ambiguities. So section 110.14D, specifying terminal connection torque here, should be able to see that, says tightening torque values for terminal connections shall be as indicated on equipment or in installation instructions provided by the manufacturer. An approved means shall be used to achieve the indicated torque value. It's possible that the wording has changed slightly here. Nonetheless, even when there was an ambiguity here, so-called, it really wasn't that hard to use your powers of inference to think, maybe this is still required. Maybe out of these two interpretations I can come up with here, and the first one I'm going to go over just doesn't even really make sense, maybe the stricter one that requires it would be the case. We'll go over why. So this guy that I have in particular, who seems to want to talk his way out of breaking out the torque wrench or this torque screwdriver, seems to think that this means that, or at least a previous version of it means that the manufacturer has to stamp their torque values that they want on there onto the fixture that will be torqued. And then if you want to achieve that torque, you have to use an approved means to do it. And in the informational note 1 here, examples of approved means of achieving the indicated torque values include torque tools or devices such as shear bolts or breakaway style devices with visual indicators that demonstrate that the proper torque has been applied. So now let's just think about it. We have that first interpretation, okay? But now we have another interpretation which says, okay, I mean, besides, again, these are differing editions that we're using from him. This one is a lot less ambiguous, if it ever was, because here it says tightening torque values for terminal connection shall be as indicated on equipment. It's possible in previous editions that the word as was omitted, but I'm going to go ahead and doubt that. But let's just go with the idea that the word as was omitted. Why, using the first interpretation here that this guy uses, that I have so much, what's the word I'm looking for? So much disagreement with, let's just call it. Why would the code bother to require stamping an optional torque value onto equipment? But then, this torque value that's optional, you can tighten it to any torque that presumably feels tight, right? According to this interpretation. So, but to achieve that optional torque, you have to use an approved means to achieve it. Now, I want you to ask yourself, does that make any sense at all? Especially when we have this informational annex here that says, like you can use breakaway style lugs or shear bolts, things that break when you achieve the required torque. I mean, why would we even bother with that? It just doesn't, like, how would you even enforce that? Oh, you just so happen to hit the recommended optional torque, but you didn't use approved means with NIST traceable calibration certificates to do it. That just doesn't make sense. So what perhaps is the other interpretation? And the correct interpretation is the one we'll assume is the version in the 2023 code here that definitely includes the word as. Tightening torque values for terminal connections shall be as indicated on equipment or in installation instructions provided by the manufacturer. So here, it's not ambiguous at all. It says that your tightening value shall, not should, not may, shall, required, shall be to the indicated torque value. Doesn't seem that hard to understand. And to achieve it, you have to use approved means of achieving the torque. You can't use the old, touchy-feely wrist. I've been doing this for 40 years, torque wrench, doing it by hand feel, because even professionals can be off by 40%. Wow, who knew? And some of these torque values are incredibly specific. Do you know exactly what 23 inch-pounds feels like? How different does it feel from 25 inch-pounds? Oh, what about 24? 21 inch-pounds? Okay. Then I think, yes, 110.21, equipment markings. 110.21A1. This is the general section here. Bottom. Okay. What says? Manufacturer's name, trademark, and other descriptive marking by which the organization responsible for the product can be identified shall be applied or affixed to all electrical equipment. So far, not particularly relevant. It becomes more apparent its relevancy as we go on. Other markings that indicate voltage, current, wattage, or other ratings shall be provided as specified elsewhere in this code. The marking shall be of sufficient duration to withstand the environment involved. Wow, okay. So we're talking about markings that shall be on the equipment. So let's just talk about the ones that are specifically mentioned: voltage, wattage, amperage. Is that on there? Well, current. So amperage is the voltage rating optional? How about the current rating? Is that optional? These are required to be on here. You know what else is required to be on there? The torque value. And it would seem to me that the same reason that they include the voltage rating is the same reason they would include the torque rating. Okay? For safe operation of this, or guaranteed safe by the manufacturer operation of this, you need to follow everything that's specified in the installation. So can this guy, I'm not going to name him, but can this guy tell me how all these other markings on here are on these little listing labels, here, voltage ratings? Yeah, can you tell me why these are required, but the other ones, the torque value is not? I'm going to go ahead and say that he, or anyone else who would argue this, does not have a real reason. They either have faulty interpretation, most likely, by far most likely. The less charitable interpretation, however, is that they just don't feel like taking the extra time to torque the lug. I mean, you got to hold the tool in the correct torque for like 5 seconds to allow for wire deformation. I mean, that just, you have a large project, that just adds a lot of time, but seems to me that time's no object if we're doing something correctly. The other thing I want to address, informational note 2 on the terminal connection torque section. There was also used in his reasoning for why torque values as indicated in the product instructions and included in the listing clearly are just optional. And it reads, it's referring to UL 486A and B, and that is a little table, if you don't know, that provides recommended torque values for things that the manufacturer has not specified the torque on. And it reads, I'm going to omit the reference to the thing that's in the first sentence because I just referenced it. See such and such standard that I just mentioned for safe wire connectors, informative Annex 1 for torque values in the absence of manufacturer's recommendations. Equipment manufacturer can be contacted if numeric torque values are not indicated on the equipment or if the installation instructions are not available. Okay. So here's the thing about UL 486A and B. That table is there to provide recommended torque values when it's not specified. These are shoulds. Nowhere in there does it indicate it's a shall, that it's enforceable. It's just good practice. If, well, you know, I have this thing here that the manufacturer didn't think needed a very particular torque. but I want to maybe get a better idea of how tight it should be. Here is this informative table here. And all the language in the table couches it as a should or a may, recommendation. So this really isn't an argument at all. If the torque values are not specified on the thing, then there's no real required torque values. The other thing, however, is that he says that since the contacting the manufacturer deal in the absence of instructions is a can instead of a shall, that somehow that negates everything else we just talked about. And that's simply not applicable here because it's still required in section 110.3 installation use equipment that is listed, labeled, or shall be installed in accordance with any instructions, including in the listing, labeling, or identification. And so even though it itself does not require finding the instructions, you're still required to install this stuff according to the instructions included in the listing. And so though it says the manufacturer can be contacted, depending on the situation, you still have to obtain the instructions. The instructions are not made optional by the fact that you can contact the manufacturer in the absence of instructions. And I would even argue that the can is sort of a nudge in the right direction. How do I best explain this? If you don't have instructions, you can contact the manufacturer for them. And if there aren't any, then or there aren't any required torque values, then there's no required torque value. But this simply, because of section 110.3, this does not preclude you obtaining the instructions. In fact, this is an informational note here that he's using, and this is an actual 110.3b is an actual section in the code. And so 110.3b holds a higher weight in a perceived or actual conflict or ambiguity than does 110.14d informational note 2, because this is just an informational note, and this is an actual enforceable section, 110.3b. And so really none of his reasoning holds up to scrutiny in any way, shape, or form at all. And if we just applied even a modicum of common sense, that we should see that in any of the ambiguities that he brought up, that he reasons excuses you from being required to follow the specified torque for a lug, simply not only doesn't hold water, but has a hole in the bottom of it that's about the size of the bottom of the container. His reasoning is simply pathetic. You know, and you know, when it comes to stuff like this, let's just say you install a installation, this panel here, and the panel overheats and burns the building down. Which which interpretation of any of the ambiguities, I think I gave you like two of them, of any of the ambiguities, do you think a reasonable jury is going to side with? Which of the two? Why? I mean, it's basic legal stuff that we can't impose burdens on optional things. If the torque is optional, then we can't require a torque wrench in the off chance that you happen to hit the torque value. I don't even, it's hard to even put into words because that's such a stupid interpretation. It's just, I don't know what to say. And then somehow an informational note which has an apparent contradiction with an actual section here, 110.3b, somehow precluding it doesn't make any sense. This is information here saying if you don't have the instructions, you can contact the manufacturer for it. Okay? It is possible. It doesn't say you may, it says you can, which perhaps clears up my mental block that I had a couple minutes ago. You can. You have the ability to contact the manufacturer in the absence of instructions. And guess what? If the instructions are included in the listing, which they are, you're required by something that's higher than an informational note to follow them. I think I have adequately disproven this guy's vacuous reasoning. If you are in literally any state, they all have a NEC edition that is current enough to include requirements for torque values. And so the question, to torque or not, am I required to, is when specified by the manufacturer, is an unambiguous yes. Yes. This is not hard. It is not hard to figure this out. Okay? You can use whatever reasoning you want to try and snake your way out of this. Even if it's the most pathetic, stupid reasoning imaginable. Like this guy that I have in mind. But objective reality says yes. When the torque is specified, yes. This has been Turbo Educational, destroying more idiocy every day. I hope you have been adequately educated. Goodbye.